Around the World Lit Audio. Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Part 2. Week 3. Chapters 1 to 3. Full narration script. Channel intro. Welcome to Around the World Lit Audio, the greatest novels ever written, from every corner of the world, in English. New chapter every week. Free to listen. Chapter recap. In week 2, Raskolnikov did it. He climbed the stairs to the pawnbroker's apartment, rang the bell, went in. He killed Alona Ivanovna. Then Lizaveta, the sister who was supposed to be elsewhere, came back early. He killed her too. He hid behind the door while two men knocked on the landing. He slipped out when they left. He replaced the axe in the janitor's room. He went back to his garret, and lay on his sofa, and waited to feel like Napoleon. He did not feel like Napoleon. Part 2. Chapters 1 through 3. Part 2. Chapter 1. The fever. He lost the next several days. Not in the way you lose a day when you are busy, the productive disappearance of time into useful activity. In the way you lose days when the mind has decided, without consulting you, that it cannot deal with what has happened, and has chosen unconsciousness as the only available alternative. He burned with fever. He lay on his sofa in his garret, and the world dissolved and reformed around him, in configurations that bore no reliable relationship to reality. His landlady sent her servant to check on him. The servant was a young woman named Nastasia who had a practical manner, and no patience for drama, and who brought him tea and looked at him, with the expression of someone watching a situation develop that they had predicted would develop badly. He dreamed. The dreams were not about the murder directly. The mind is too intelligent for that kind of directness. The dreams were about other things, that contained the murder inside them, the way a word can contain a meaning without stating it. He dreamed about his childhood. He dreamed about the horse again. He dreamed about laughter coming from somewhere he could not locate. On the third day or the fourth, he was not certain which, a man appeared in his room. The man's name was Razumikhin. He was Raskolnikov's oldest friend from university, a large, cheerful, energetic man with the particular vitality of someone who finds the world interesting and does not take its difficulties personally. He had been looking for Raskolnikov. He had heard he was unwell. He had come. He looked at Raskolnikov with the direct concern of a man who does not dress up his feelings. He said, "You look terrible." Raskolnikov said, "I am fine." Razumikhin said, "You are not fine. You are clearly not fine. You have been lying here for days and no one has been looking after you properly." He organized things. He found a doctor, a young man named Zosimov, who examined Raskolnikov with professional efficiency, and announced that he had a fever of nervous origin and needed rest, and food and someone to ensure he did not do anything ill-advised. Razumikhin appointed himself this person. He brought food. He brought clean clothes. He sat in Raskolnikov's room and talked about the university, about mutual friends, about various topics of no particular urgency, with the persistent cheerfulness of someone who has decided that what his friend needs is the sound of a normal human voice, and is prepared to provide it indefinitely. Raskolnikov listened from his sofa. He was grateful in an abstract way, the way you are grateful for things, when you are too exhausted to feel anything cleanly. Razumikhin was here. Razumikhin was organizing. These were good things. He was too tired to say so. On the day he was well enough to sit up properly, something arrived. Money. A letter from his mother. 35 rubles. Scraped together from somewhere with the particular ingenuity of a woman who does not have money, but has the determination to find it when her son needs it. The letter was full of love and news and the particular combination of hope and worry that his mother's letters always contained. He read it. He gave Razumikhin 25 rubles and asked him to buy clothes. Then he lay back down, and thought about the money, about where it came from, about what it cost his mother to send it, about the fact that he had taken money from the pawnbroker's chest, and that money was hidden in his room right now, and he could not spend it, and could not explain it, and could not look at it, without understanding what it represented. He had taken the money to prove the theory. The extraordinary man takes what is necessary and uses it for a higher purpose. That was the theory. He had not used it for anything. It was in his room, wrapped in cloth, under the wallpaper, doing nothing except existing as evidence of what he had done. He was not Napoleon. He understood this now with a completeness that the theory had never achieved. Napoleon would have used the money. Napoleon would have moved forward. Napoleon would not be lying on a sofa in a garret in St. Petersburg burning with fever and waiting for his friend to bring him soup. Part 2. Chapter 2. The Summons. A few days later, when he was well enough to walk, a summons arrived from the police station. It was a routine summons, a printed form with his name filled in, requesting his presence to answer questions about an overdue debt to his landlady. Nothing about the murder. Nothing suspicious. The kind of bureaucratic communication that arrives in the lives of people who owe money, and is in itself unremarkable. Raskolnikov read it 3 times. He put it down. He picked it up. He put it down again. The reasonable response to a summons about a landlord's debt was to go, answer the questions, and leave. The summons had nothing to do with the murder. He had not been seen. There was no evidence connecting him to apartment 50 on the floor above. He had been careful, not perfectly careful, but careful enough. He went to the police station. The police station was a busy, cluttered place that smelled of bureaucracy, the specific combination of paper and anxiety that accumulates in places where people are required to explain themselves to officials. He waited. He was called in. He sat across from a clerk named Zametov who was young and fashionable and looked like someone who had recently acquired his position and was still finding out what it required. The questions were about the debt. He answered them. The interview was proceeding in the routine direction of routine administrative processes, when an officer entered the room and sat down nearby and the conversation shifted. The officer's name was Ilya Petrovich. He was a lieutenant, pompous, loud, with the particular self-importance of a man who has found that his position allows him to be exactly as he always wanted to be. He did not sit quietly. He entered a room and the room reorganized around him, which was exactly what he wanted. He sat down and began talking about the murder, about the pawnbroker, about the investigation, about the police's theories concerning who might have done it and why. He talked about it with the detachment of a professional discussing a professional matter, the way doctors talk about illness, clinically, without apparent awareness that the illness might be personal to anyone present. Raskolnikov sat and listened, and felt the room changing around him. He felt it in his hands first, a trembling that he tried to control and could not entirely control, then in his chest, a pressure that was not quite fear, and not quite guilt, but was composed of both in proportions he could not separate. He sat with his hands in his lap, and listened to the lieutenant talk about the murder and felt himself becoming, in ways he could not stop, transparent. Not literally transparent, but transparent in the way that people become transparent when they are trying very hard to appear normal, the transparency of effort, of concealment, of the specific quality of attention that a person pays to their own behavior when they believe they are being watched. He fainted. He did not lose consciousness entirely. He was aware of falling, aware of voices around him, aware of being helped to a bench. He lay on the bench for a moment, and then sat up and said he was fine, the familiar lie, the reflex response. The lieutenant looked at him. The clerk Zametov looked at him. He said it was the fever. He said he had been ill. He said he needed air. They let him go. He walked out of the police station into the street and the fresh air hit him, and he stood on the pavement for a moment with the city moving around him and understood something. He had almost confessed. Not in words, he had not said anything incriminating, but in the trembling and the faintness, and the specific quality of his attention during the conversation about the murder, he had been as close to confession as a person can be without making one. The body, it seemed, had opinions that the mind had not authorized. Part 2, Chapter 3, The Scene at the Crystal Palace. He did not go home. He walked. Walking was what he did when the room became unbearable, when the walls of the garret contracted around the thing hidden under the wallpaper, when the sofa, his sofa, where he had lain and thought and planned, and recovered, felt like an accusation. He walked without direction and found himself eventually in a restaurant, a place called the Crystal Palace, not elegant but not disreputable, a place where people sat at tables and ate, and conducted the ordinary transactions of ordinary life, with the ordinary indifference of people who have not committed any murders recently. He sat at a table. He ordered something. He looked around. At the next table sat a young man he recognized, Zametov, the fashionable clerk from the police station. Alone, reading a newspaper. Raskolnikov looked at him. Something happened in his mind, something that had been happening more frequently since the murder, a quality of recklessness, of terrible freedom, as though the worst thing had already been done, and nothing that followed could be worse. A kind of daring that was not courage. Courage involves a choice, but was something closer to the daring of a man who has nothing left to lose and is curious what will happen if he does the thing he should not do. He sat down across from Zametov. Zametov looked up from his newspaper. Raskolnikov said, "I want to talk to you about the murder." Zametov said nothing. He put down his newspaper. Raskolnikov talked about the murder, not confessing, not saying I did it, here is what happened, this is where the money is, but talking about it with the intimate familiarity of someone who has been thinking about nothing else for a week, speculating about who might have done it, speculating about how they might have felt, describing, in precise psychological detail, the state of mind of a person who had committed such an act, and was now living with it. He described it in the way only one person in St. Petersburg could have described it. Zametov listened. His face went through several expressions that Zametov was trying to control and not entirely succeeding at controlling. Raskolnikov finished. He looked at Zametov. He said, What if it was me? What if I was the murderer? He said it lightly, with a slight smile, in the tone of someone posing a theoretical question. Zametov looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "That is impossible. You were ill." Raskolnikov looked at him for a moment longer. Then he stood up, left money on the table, and walked out of the Crystal Palace into the street. He was shaking, not with fear, or not only with fear, with something that felt, disturbingly, like excitement. Like the excitement of a person who has stood at the edge of a very long drop, and looked down and stepped back, and is now walking away with the knowledge that they could have stepped forward. He walked toward the Neva. He stopped on a bridge and looked at the water below. He thought about what he had just done. He thought about Zametov's face. He thought about the lieutenant in the police station, and the trembling in his hands, and the fainting and all the ways in which his body was refusing to cooperate with the story his mind was trying to tell. He turned away from the water and continued walking. He had somewhere to go. He had decided, while walking, that there was one person in St. Petersburg who might understand what he was going through, not because he intended to confess to her, but because she was the only person he had met since the murder, who seemed to exist in the same moral register as what he had done. Someone who had also crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, who also lived in a world rearranged by a single irreversible decision. He went to find Sonia, Marmeladov's daughter, the girl her father had sent into prostitution to feed the family, the girl who had given her father money for drink and watched him take it and said nothing. She was, he thought, someone who understood what it meant to have done an unforgivable thing, and to keep living afterward. He knocked on her door. Chapter Transition. You have reached the end of Part 2, Chapters 1 through 3 of Crime and Punishment, by Fyodor Dostoevsky. In the next episode, Raskolnikov meets Sonia, and finds in her something he did not expect. He attends Marmeladov's funeral. He encounters Porfiry Petrovitch for the first time, the investigator who will spend the rest of the novel not quite accusing him, not quite clearing him, simply watching. And the punishment that is not the law, but the mind continues to tighten. The next episode is available next week. Subscribe to Around the World Lit Audio so you never miss a chapter. A new episode arrives every week.